Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be talking about something a little unique. This was actually prompted by a commenter. So again, I just, in general, I do read the comments and I do actively enjoy engaging with you all when you leave productive comments. Obviously, a lot of the comments I get are just people not being productive. That's okay. This is a free speech zone. But nonetheless, I got a comment that was essentially saying, so, and this is on my last video where I also talked about Ohio, and someone said, "Hey, look, well, if you look county by county in 2018, even though it was a midterm year, you'll see that Sherrod Brown, the Democrat, outright got more votes, not percentages, but like raw votes in some of the counties in rural Ohio in 2018 midterm year than 2024." And so uh, that's absolutely true, and there are specific counties you can look at where even though there was lower turnout, more people voted for Sherrod Brown, often by the hundreds, even by the thousands in some of these areas in 2018 than 2024. And basically, the commenter, kind of asked about why I thought that was happening, and just some questions about it in general. So today, I want to make a video about why I think specifically in Ohio and in maybe neighboring states like Pennsylvania, Indiana, to an extent, Wisconsin, but less so. The Republicans have gained in rural areas so much in the Trump era. And I actually think there's a pretty simple answer, and I think it's culture. Now, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on what that means. But before I do that, let's just talk a little bit about the differences in the Trump era, or the things that are really relevant politically in the Trump era that were not relevant when Bush or Barack Obama was president. And so the first thing that I think is really important to note is that political polarization is really high right now. It's probably the highest it's ever been, with the possible exception of, or not possible. It's still lower than it was during the pre-civil, like in the 1850s. But like the problem that we have right now is that, or not a problem, but I'd say the dynamic that we have right now, which a lot of people think is negative, is that the amount of people who split their tickets, maybe they vote for one party presidentially, but then they vote, for the other party in the governor's race or in the Senate race, that number has gone down. Now, there are people who still do that. And there are people, and there are states that still, like look at Vermont or New Hampshire. These are states that still have to split their ticket. It's kind of still quite, popular in the Northeast. But like across the country, what you'll see is that there's less split ticket voting and more just down ballot. I'm voting all Democrat, I'm voting all Republican. And so when I say the Trump era has kind of brought that on, I don't necessarily want to pin that all on Trump, because it does take two to tango. But I do think that the Trump style of politics, which is extremely tribal and very, and again, I don't say this to be negative, but it's very, very kind of cultural, in the sense that being a Trump supporter, or being, calling yourself like a MAGA Republican, or calling yourself really a Republican, or whatever, now means something more fundamental than it did 20 years ago, if that makes sense. And by the way, the same thing goes for being a Democrat. To call yourself a liberal or a Democrat, or like even like a Kamala Harris voter, I think means something a lot, that says a lot more about you than it would have been to say like, oh, I voted for John Kerry, or oh, I voted for Al Gore, or even maybe in 2008, oh, I voted for Barack Obama. And so that has, I think, kind of what led to people being less willing to vote for the other party. Because look, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, I could have said, oh, I'm a Republican, but the senator that I have who's a Democrat, he seems like a good guy, he's passed some good bills, I'll vote for him. But now if I'm a Republican, there's a list of things that you hear that I believe, right? Like Democrats doing this, Democrats doing that. And I can't rationally think I'm going to vote for a Democrat after my party has, said Democrats are responsible for all these bad things. And the same thing goes for Democrats with Republicans. And so that's what I mean by polarization in the Trump era. And now to return to what I said initially, which is that I think these swings in the rural areas have come as a result of culture, that's kind of tied into that, because not only does it mean something more fundamental to vote for Trump or to vote for Harris than it did to vote for Bush or Gore or Bush or Kerry, politics has shifted more in the direction of culture wars than it was 20 years ago. Now, if you were alive in 2004, and if you were especially paying attention to politics in 2004, you'll remember that Republicans really campaigned hard on the issue of gay marriage, and they were against it. And there were referendums in swing states where a lot of political commentators thought that gay marriage being on the ballot hurt John Kerry and the Democrats. And so, absolutely, culture wars were a thing in 2004. And 2004 was a more culturally conservative year, by the way. That was the last time before 2024 Republicans won the popular vote. It was also probably one of the most culturally conservative times of the 21st century, arguably more so than right now. And so, what you have now that's different, though, is that the salience of these issues is rising. There have always been people who like to talk about social issues, but the salience of those issues and the attention they receive from politicians or from the media is now a lot higher than it was in the early 2000s. And that's why you have people who vote more and more on social issues, which is why, like, go back to the 1990s or to the early 2000s. And Ohio's a good example of this, but I'm going to use an even more extreme example. Go to West Virginia, and you will see, especially in the 90s, Bill Clinton did really well in West Virginia in the 90s. And even in 1976, Jimmy Carter won West Virginia. It was one of like the few states he won, or in 1980, sorry. It was one of the few states he won in 1980 when he lost to Ronald Reagan in a landslide nationally. So West Virginia for a long time was a lot more Democratic than the country as a whole. Now, that doesn't mean that West Virginia used to be more liberal than the country as a whole. In fact, even though obviously the year 1980 was a lot less liberal of a time, than 2025, right? There's still a big difference between going to West Virginia and going to, say, California or even the suburbs of, like, Philadelphia. I would argue that that California as a whole, or even states like Pennsylvania as a whole, or New York as a whole, which I believe voted Republican that year, right in 1980. Yeah, they voted Republican in 1980. Even going back to those, or going to those states which were more conservative than West Virginia, or which were more Republican than West Virginia, I should say, those states still were a lot more socially liberal, right? There was still a lot more, I would say, not like, I'm trying to think of how to say this, right? There was a lot more, I would say, like, openness to issues like gay marriage, which, by the way, in 1980, gay marriage was still not legal in any state. But what I'm getting at here is that you could not, back in 1980, you could not look at how someone voted or how a state voted and said, oh, because you voted Republican, you're socially conservative. Or, oh, because you voted Democratic, you're socially liberal. No, because West Virginia was never more liberal or progressive socially than California, at least not in centuries, right? So just because West Virginia voted for Jimmy Carter and because California voted for Ronald Reagan doesn't mean, and Jimmy Carter was, by the way, more socially progressive than Ronald Reagan, certainly, that didn't mean we can make that assumption. And so the difference is nowadays we can do that. Nowadays we can say with pretty good accuracy, if this area voted for Donald Trump, it's probably socially conservative. If this area voted for Kamala Harris, it's probably socially liberal. Are there exceptions? Of course there are. But it's a lot easier now to do that than it would have been 44 years ago. So that's kind of like the podcast part of this episode, where I kind of give, I know I didn't show you anything yet, but I kind of just give a take. And I hope you stuck with me, because I do think that's very true. And so now what I'm going to do is we're going to look at Ohio as a case study, because even though I think West Virginia is a good example of this, Ohio is more relevant because it was still competitive in 2024 in the Senate race, because maybe if Democrats play their card right, it'll be competitive in 2026. So what we can do is we can look, and a really good example of this is going to the border counties with West Virginia, or with West Virginia. Yeah, look at Jefferson, Belmont, Monroe, and Washington. Monroe is actually crazy to me. So Monroe, you can see Sherrod got 1725 votes there in 2018. He got well over that. He got 2,500. He got 800 more votes in Monroe County in 2018 than he did in 2024. And that's despite the fact in 2018, 4.4 million votes were cast. In 2024, a full million more votes were cast. Or no, more than that, like a full 1.2 million votes were cast, because we had a third party too, taking nearly 200,000 votes. And despite that, Monroe County, Sherrod Brown got fewer votes in 2024 than 2018. And that's just one example. And you can do this for a bunch. There's probably at least a dozen counties statewide where you can do that, right? Jefferson, I didn't check before, but I bet actually this is a little big. How about let's see if I can get one right. I bet Noble County, 1,300 for Sherrod Brown, 2024. Noble County, he got 400 more. Noble County. So like you can play this game with yourself. Like on your own time, go to a county, see if you can guess, did Sherrod Brown get more votes in 2024 or 2018? If it's rural, if it's Republican, chances are he probably did. And that's a crazy thing, because it isn't like, oh, he did 2% worse. No, it's he literally got fewer votes in a year where fewer people turned, or he got fewer votes in a year where millions more people turned out statewide in 2024 than in 2018, which was a midterm year. And so the reason that I like to look at like the Appalachian part of Ohio over here is because this area used to be pretty blue. And you can go to 2018 and you can see that it's kind of light red, like Monroe, especially Sherrod Brown only lost it by 5 points. He lost it by, this is a 45-point margin. So he did 40 points worse between 20 and 6 years, 40% worse, which is crazy. But what I want to do is look at Monroe County specifically in the presidential elections. And actually, before we do Monroe, we're going to do Ohio as a whole to kind of get a feel for this. So in 2000, just to go through this very briefly, Al Gore won the popular vote by 0.5 point. He lost Ohio by around 3.5. So Ohio was 4 points right of the country. As you can see, Al Gore did win Monroe County right here. Let's go to 2004. Kari lost the popular vote by 2.5. He won Monroe County. He lost Ohio by 2. So Ohio was actually half point left of the country in 2004. 2008, let's see. Obama won the popular vote by, I think, 7 or 8% that year. He won Ohio by 4.5, a little more than that. Obama won Monroe County. So Ohio, with Obama winning Monroe County, Ohio was still around 2.5 to 3.5 points to the right of the country. 2012, Ohio was pretty in line with the country. Like if we take a look at the national popular vote, I believe Obama won by around 4, or he won it by around 3.9%. Ohio, Obama won by 3% exactly, so it was like less than a point right of the country. Mitt Romney was the first Republican in a while to win Monroe County. And then year 2016, you bet Donald Trump did really well here. He won Ohio by 8%. He carried Monroe County easily. Like if we even go county by county here, this is kind of 8 years prior to voted for Barack Obama. Monroe, it voted for, he gave Trump got 71% of the vote here, which is insane. So that's absolutely crazy. And so in this election, obviously, Ohio was around 10.5 points right of the country. It got even redder in 2020. This is at its reddest point this century. Ohio was nearly 13% right of the country. Joe Biden did not do well in Monroe County. And I wonder, actually, they might have a swing map here. Yeah, they do. And as you can see, in Monroe County, Biden outright did worse than Hillary Clinton, and it trended right of the state. And so then what you can do using 2024, where Kamala Harris did actually a bit better than Ohio relative to the country than Biden did. Ohio went from being 13% right of the country to being around 10% right of the country, a little less than that. But obviously in Monroe County, she didn't do well. And if we're lucky, we'll have a swing map here. And as you can see, Monroe County actually kind of stuck out as being a lot more like red trending than even some of its neighboring counties. So overall, what you can kind of see here is that Ohio has gotten redder relative to the country. In 2004 and 2008, 2004 was outright left of the country. In 2008 and 2012, it was, between 1 and 3.5 points right of the country. And nowadays, it's 9 to 13% right of the country. And so the reason that this is significant is because Ohio is a state that's got a lot of working class voters, whether that be black or white. Obviously black working class voters still tend to be pretty Democratic. White working class voters have gotten a lot more Republican in the Trump era. And white working class voters, like I said, to go back to my original thesis here, have gotten more Republican, I think, because of cultural issues, right? Because these are voters who voted for Al Gore or John Kerry, not because they agreed with them on issues like gay marriage. By the way, Al Gore and John Kerry didn't even come out in support of gay marriage. I think Obama in 2012 was the first candidate presidentially, major party to support gay marriage. But they were certainly more progressive on it than Bush was. But anyways, working class voters in Monroe County, right here in this rural part of Ohio, they were not voting for John Kerry because he was more progressive on social issues than George W. Bush was. They're voting for John Kerry because of economic policy. They're voting for him because of issues like healthcare, trade, for example, working with unions. Specifically, Ohio is a big union state. And so that hasn't changed. Democrats still try to portray themselves as the more, union-friendly party. They still portray themselves as the party of providing healthcare. The difference is, first of all, the Republicans have gotten a bit better at playing that game. Donald Trump, I think, is a lot better at messaging to working class voters than George W. Bush. That's empirically true if you look at any election result ever. But also, the bigger thing is that it's really about social issues. And now these voters really distrust the Democratic Party because of their positions on social issues. These voters are often not super in favor of things like gay marriage, or especially Democrats. In polls, a lot of people believe Democrats were harmed by the issue of trans sports, right? Men transitioning to women who were men transitioning to women who were playing in women's sports, right? That was an issue that Donald Trump really hammered against Kamala Harris right? There's some debate over whether that actually hurt her. It probably actually did in areas like Monroe County, which are pretty conservative socially. And so that's what you really are getting at, which is that even though a lot of the issues economically haven't changed, even though, um, a lot of these people are, support Democratic policy like in a vacuum, like Obamacare, or even some of the stuff passed by Biden, like the bipartisan infrastructure bill, they're not going to vote for Democrats anymore because they're perceived as being extremely out of touch on social issues. And the best example of this I have is Monroe County, because if you look at 2012, even though it voted for Mitt Romney, before the Trump era, guess what we're going to do? We're going to talk about a little political polarization while we're at it. It voted for Romney in 2012. Okay, so it was a Republican county federally, but before Trump was on the scene, before we had this kind of more politically divided era, look at this election. Republicans won this governorship by 30 points. They won the county where Cleveland is. They won Cuyahoga County. They won the county where Columbus is. They won the county where Toledo is. They lost Monroe County. So even just 11 years ago, there was a gubernatorial election where not only did Republicans win by 30 statewide and lose Monroe County, but Monroe County was bluer than Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland is. And that is a great example of how voters, even though we're close to the modern era now, we're not in 2004, we're in 2014, voters still backed the Democratic candidate, probably for an economic reason, at a really, really impressive rate in Monroe County. Whereas if you go to Cuyahoga County, or especially Franklin County, which is where Cleveland is, or which is where Columbus is, these are more affluent areas. And at the end of the day, these areas probably voted on fiscal issues. They probably said, I want lower taxes. And now we have that switch. Now we have voters in Franklin County voted for the Democratic Party in 2024, in part because of social issues, because they're close to the Democratic Party on social issues. Whereas in Monroe County, on social issues, they're a lot closer to Trump. Guess who they voted for? And so that's my long answer to this question that I really found really interesting. That's why you have elections where, even though there's higher turnout, even though more people are voting, you get fewer votes as a Democrat than you did the previous year or the previous cycle, where there were fewer people voting, because there are a ton of people in Monroe County who might have been open to voting Democrat 20 years ago, but in the era of political polarization, coupled with a higher salience of social issues, are less willing to do so now. And so, based on just rough estimates, in Monroe County, Sherrod Brown, he dropped 800 votes between 2024 and 2018. And by the way, it's probably, that means 800 people flipped. It's probably more than that, because there's probably some Democrats who did not come out in the midterm but came out presidentially to vote for Sherrod Brown in 2024. So really, he might have lost as many as like 1,000 votes or 1,200 votes, really. It was just people switching between that 6-year period. And so that's really, really striking. So thank you to the commenter who posted this on the previous video. I really enjoyed talking about this. I like doing videos like these because I think they're really cool, just in general. So, again, feel free to let me know if you have any suggestions or if you have any questions for me. And I will see you all next time.